Hey, everybody. Today I have for you podcast number 020, also known as 20. Today's podcast is titled The Unlimited. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. And this week's episode on the Limitless Life Network podcast is entitled The Unlimited. And I'm Dr. Pete Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network podcast where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals and living the life that you deserve. And this podcast is for you if you want to live a life with less limitations and more freedom with a healthier mind, body, and spirit. So, today's podcast is going to be a little different than some of the previous ones, and I hope you like it. If you don't, maybe you can comment and let me know. If you are enjoying the podcast, be sure to, uh, follow, share it with friends. The more that we get this out there, I think the better. I know there's a lot of people out there that put a lot of limitations on their life and could benefit from the content that we have here. So, last week's episode was a huge hit, interviewing my son Nathan, and people really responded well to that. So, if you haven't seen that episode, check it out. So that was a really good one. Anyway, so today's episode really is, I think, I think it's a really helpful one, at least the content that I'm planning to share today, because it really speaks to the name of this podcast, which is Limitless, and the title being The Unlimited. And I've been doing a lot of reading in the beginning of this year, a lot more than usual, I think. And oftentimes this is the time of year when I do read more because I'm inside more. But my wife gave me a book uh, for Christmas. It seems like I got a couple books for Christmas, and they've both been home runs. And this book is interesting. It's kind of a devotional book, so you read a page a day, and I think it's called The Mysteries or Life's Mysteries or something like that. Anyways, very, very good. So far, I'm 10 days into it and I absolutely love it. So, a couple of things I'm going to share with you just because they're really um, uplifting points, helpful points, and I think I've taken away a ton from it. So I got a few notes to read, but the first one, it's really I just pulled this one out of there and kind of gave it my own title, which is it's singular versus plural. And singular versus plural, in this book, they talk about the Hebrew word shemayim, and Shemayim is Hebrew for heaven, and the Hebrew for earth is Aretz, Aretz. So Shemayim is heaven, and Aretz is earth. So heaven and earth. And anything in Hebrew that ends with the letters I am, indicates that that word is a plural. So it would really be translated heavens. So being heaven being the plural and earth being singular. So from that, you could say the earthly versus the heavenly, or the earthly versus the heavenly, the singular versus the plural. And singular indicates that there are limits. It's limited. It's finite. It has, you know, possessions fall under that category. So no matter how many earthly possessions that you have, um, it can never really totally fill you or make you feel complete. I'm not saying that it's bad to have earthly possessions. Don't take it that way. I know some people will, and then there's other people that are going to kind of miss this point, but hopefully you don't. It really is about being complete and being filled. So think about things that have limitations and how it's just kind of a disappointment. You're wishing that there was more to it because it's got a limit to it. And a life focused on the limited is a life with limitations. Only that which is spiritual, the infinite, can fill our heart fully. So think that's I'm going to hit on that a little bit more, but the suggestion is to fill your heart with that which is heavenly and spiritual because there are no limitations. So what does that really mean when it all comes down to it? Like, how do you fill your heart with all that stuff? So how do you fill your heart with something that's heavenly and limitless versus filling your heart with earthly desires and earthly things that have limitations to them? And I can think of some concrete examples, at least for me, that I know there have been times in my life when my heart could have not been any more full. And I think about seeing my first child born. My heart was overwhelmed with joy, overwhelmed with love. You look into a newborn baby's eyes, especially your very firstborn, not that you love them anymore, but it's that first opportunity to see your first offspring, and it's a miracle. I mean, it's something that is supernatural to see new life come into the world, especially your own offspring, and to see that, it just fills you because it's nothing that you really could do on your own. There had to have been something else, a supernatural power, in order for that to even happen, with the amount of order and organization that it takes to make another human being. It's not just a random event. There's an intelligent design to that. So that's an example of living a life without limitations because that is you. It's a very spiritual moment. I don't care who you are. You feel so connected to your own offspring when you see them born. And I think you could probably think of some other examples, but I can think of examples in nature where my heart was filled. I remember walking out in the dark and early morning to go hunting one time, and it was really, really cold. And for whatever reason, there was some snow on the ground. But as I was walking, there was this crunch, and all the bushes were frozen and they had ice crystals all over them. And as the sun came up in the morning, it was just absolutely magical. It was absolutely beautiful. And my heart was filled. There was no noise. It was just the sun rising, the crunch of the snow. That was the only thing I could hear. There were no other thoughts in my head. And that was filling, right? And that to me was a very spiritual moment because there was nothing else that I was thinking about. There was no earthly things that I was thinking about at that moment. So, uh, that's super cool, super good, and I think that'll help you. Point number two is the snake. What in the world? I told you this podcast was going to be a little different. The snake. What about the snake? Well, what do we know about snakes? A lot of people don't like them. My wife can't stand snakes. She has a huge aversion to snakes. Um, Snakes are cold blooded, and cold blooded animals. Um, Snakes, what do? They slither, right? And they twist when they slither, right? They twist back and forth, back and forth. And snakes have always represented evil. And if you think about that, what have we heard the coin the phrase of twisting of the truth, right? So that's someone who lies, they twist the truth, they're not being honest and forthright. That's an evil thing, right? So twisting of the pure, right? That leads to the unpure. So you can see how there's a correlation with this cold-blooded twisting animal focused on evil. And it's not the snake itself is evil, but what it represents as evil or the nature of evil is to twist. Evil may have its days, right? And we see that in our lives. Sometimes we think that evil is always going to be there and it's always going to rear its ugly head. And sometimes we feel hopeless when there's evil things going on in the world. I know that I have several people that I know that have just really felt like, when is this all going to end? This all this evil stuff that's happening and here and there, and that's the good news in this one is that because snakes are cold blooded, they are limited and they can't sustain, right? So, like on a day like today in central New York, it's 26 degrees out right now. A snake's not going to do anything today. A snake can't survive forever, right? It has limitations, but we can go out and we can adapt and we can persevere in weather like this. The snake can't. The snake can't handle this type of weather. It can't do what it's intended to do. So evil may have its days, but it can endure. Its days are numbered. It always fails. The good will always outlast the evil and therefore endure. Keep going on with what is true. Keep standing for what is right. And, we were talking about slavery with a couple of people today and how slavery was just a period of evil, right? And how is it that these people thought that that was an okay thing to do? And yet, I'm sure for many of those people, they thought that would never end. And probably some of them didn't want it to end. But slavery has is not gone on off the face of this earth. But in the United States, here we no longer have slavery. Good did triumph over evil. Are there still other awful things happening? Still, absolutely. And I do believe that good will triumph there as well. But we don't know when, right? So be hopeful there for sure. Number three, and we talked about it a little bit already. We talked about the wilderness. We talked about going out into nature, but the wilderness, and there's a Hebrew word for wilderness called midbar, and midbar is a place where God is speaking. And if you know anything about the stories of the Bible or the books of the Bible, um, God spoke to people in the wilderness. So he spoke to Moses through the burning bush. He brought the Israelites out into the desert and spoke to them there. So in the wilderness, when we think about the wilderness, what's out there? And the answer is really not a lot usually. Not a lot's going on. There's some things going on, but like if you go out into a desert, what do you see? You see some sand, you see some rocks, but not a lot's going on. And so all you can think about is the sun, the heat, and it's a pretty plain landscape. So why in the world would God bring people into the wilderness to speak to them? And the answer is because he's trying to speak to us all the time, but we're so distracted. And when you can remove these distractions, then you can actually listen. And that is a very difficult thing today because we have so many distractions. When was the last time that you had perfect silence and quiet that you could actually, spend some time without any distractions, without your phone buzzing you, without checking an email, without somebody interrupting you, without some music in the background? I mean, complete silence. When's the last time we did that? And it's not very often in many people's lives, other than maybe when they fall asleep. So don't despise the wilderness in your life. Instead, embrace it and listen. So we all have times in our life that seem kind of barren or even difficult. If we lose somebody in our life, or we have a tragedy happen, or say you just something really went wrong that you didn't plan or expect. Those are times when people are in desperate situations, and we just saw that on Monday Night Football. We had a guy that dropped dead on the field after a tackle, and you know, all of a sudden, it was okay to pray on national television in an NFL football game. You had players on their knees praying for their teammate or their fellow football player who wasn't even on their team because they knew it was a desperate situation, and they were waiting to hear from something, right? And God, I think God did a wonderful thing in that moment. It was a beautiful thing to see these all the good that came out of such a sad situation, such a terrible, tragic situation. And thank God this young man is going to have a full recovery from what the experts say. So super, super proud of the fact that he had people to help him, but the people that actually prayed for him, I think, need to be recognized as well. But just super happy for that family that they're gonna, and so the money that was raised for his charity. I mean, that would have never happened if that event didn't happen. So, in sometimes in the worst situations in the wilderness, when we think like things look hopeless, God can work that for an absolute mighty thing. So really, really happy about that. Um, Number four is not from this book, but I think it's really important to talk about this. But this is how because we're going to talk about operationalizing all of this. Like, how do you go out and take all this stuff and put it into play in your life? And number four is how a habit is created in our life, and it's acronym CCRR, cue, crave, response, and reward. And the example I could give would be if you were to walk into a dark room that you've never been in before, you would try to look around in the dark for a light switch. And if you eventually stumble across that light switch in that room and you flip it on, the light comes on, then you've figured out where that light switch is. Okay, so what happens in our brain? Well, the cue is the room is dark. So your brain recognizes, I need light, I can't see. And your brain thinks, okay, look for a switch. So that's the you're craving light, right? The cue is it's dark. The crave is I need light, so I want light. The response is now I've got a problem to solve. So I'm going to search around the room, the dark room, with my hands and feeling and being careful not to trip and stumble on things. And then you feel the switch, you palpate the switch, and then you flip it, and that's the reward. The light comes in. The next time you go into that same room and it's dark, how long does it take you to find the light switch? So what ends up happening is that you've memorized where the switch is. You know it's somewhere over here, and you fumble around a little bit, and then you finally find that light switch and you flip it. The next time you go into the room, it's a little quicker. And the next time, and the next time, and the next time. And I don't know if you're like me, but we have a lot of light switches in our house, and I leave the house early in the morning. So I know where every light switch is. I can turn it on and off without even thinking which switch it is because I know exactly what each switch does, and I know exactly where each switch is located. I can find them all in the dark. I don't even have to consciously think about it. I do it automatically. And that's how we create a habit. So, whenever you're trying to create a new habit, whether it's, trying to focus on the plural versus the singular, right? Or whether you're trying to, you know, read more often or go to the gym or something. And whenever you're trying to do something new that you haven't done before, you've got to solve the problem. You've got the idea like, oh, I would need to do this. And so you go out there and you crave this thing. You want the result, right? You crave this reward, like I want to be in great shape. So okay, my response is okay, I got to figure out what time I'm going to go. I got to figure out how I'm going to lay my clothes out at what time I'm going to wake up, how long it's going to take me to go work out, what's my workout going to be, how long am I going to be there, and how long is it going to take me to get cleaned up and get back into my other routine and change my clothes and go off to work. So you have to solve for all of that stuff before you actually go do it. And say you go do it the first time and it works and you get to the gym and that's your reward because you completed the objective, right? And then you do it again the next day and it was smoother, it was a little quicker, it was a little easier, you weren't fumbling around as much. After you've done it for 90 days, now it's like you've got a whole new routine. You've created a whole new routine and it's very easy to do because your brain has already been there and it's skipping right through these steps automatically because your brain is all about conserving energy, right? It has so much energy to use in a day. There's only so many problems it really has energy to solve. So, therefore, we create these habits and these neural pathways that are as efficient as possible to conserve energy. Okay. So, I think that's really important to know because the next point, which is point number 5, has a lot to do with the energy conservation. So, point number 5 is against the wind. And how many people have ever walked against the wind? And what do you notice when you're walking into the wind? You got a really strong headwind and you're walking along. What do you notice? Um, well, it creates drag, right? It's kind of pushing you back. If you walk for a long time, you don't get there as fast. You get tired more easily, and yeah, it's you're expending more energy to accomplish less, basically. So a headwind can really drain you of energy. And then the opposite is what if you turn around and you walk with the wind at your back? Well, when you walk with the wind at your back, what happens? So it's less energy. You get where you're going faster, and it's just not as difficult. You're not as tired, so it's very very simple. So how does this point apply to your life? Well, think about things where you're kind of like pushing a rope. It's the old saying. It's like you can't push a rope. And that is where you're trying super hard to do something that really just isn't going to work. It's just not set up right from the beginning. There's you haven't created you haven't chosen well with what you're trying to do. Maybe it's not the right fit, whatever it might be, a round peg in a square hole, right? It takes tons of energy. Could you get it in there? Yeah, if you sawed it down and you chopped it up and you could get that round peg into the square hole. Maybe if you had a hammer, you could beat it in there. But the point is that we want to try to do things that are in alignment, and that's super important. Things that are congruent. When you have contradictions in your life, what happens? It leads to destruction. It leads to disappointment. It leads to problems that you create along the way that take way more energy to solve versus looking at things from a natural perspective. And that is really more of the spirit-led life because if you're walking with the spirit, it's really like taking that drag and turning it into a breeze, right? Life, it goes from being a drag to being a breeze because things are in alignment. You're following the will of your creator, and that basically puts you in a great situation for things to go well, right? There's a lot less stress, there's a lot less worry, there's a lot less anxiety, and that is the beauty of understanding um, what God's plan is for all of us. So this book has been really enlightening to me, and I thought I would share some of its content with you on the podcast today. Uh, love the fact that people are giving me books to read, just because I'm very interested in learning things. I've always been curious and inquisitive about stuff. I love adventure, and sometimes reading just takes you on an adventure that you would never expect. So anyway, that's all for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. And I want you to tune in each and every week. Why? Because we want to keep you connected, keep you inspired, and keep you moving toward what? I want to keep you moving toward the life that you deserve by what? Stripping away your limitations. We'll see you next week.